Join me as I try to figure out the cheerleader effect and see if I can spot it in real life. Have you ever noticed how people in groups seem more attractive than when they're alone? This phenomenon is known as the cheerleader effect, and it's a fascinating topic in social psychology that reveals a lot about how we perceive attractiveness. So, why do we tend to think that people are more attractive when they're in a group? Is it because we're more likely to notice their best features when they're surrounded by others? Or is it because we're wired to think that being part of a group makes someone more desirable? These are just a few questions that come to mind when we think about the cheerleader effect, but there's more to it than meets the eye. For instance, do we really think that each individual in the group is more attractive, or are we just comparing them to one another? Maybe we're drawn to the social status that comes with being part of a group, or perhaps we're simply more likely to notice people when they're in a crowd. Whatever the reason, it's clear that our perception of attractiveness changes when we see people in groups. But why is that? One possible explanation is that our brains are wired to average out the features of the people in the group, making us perceive them as more attractive than if we were to see them individually. This could be because our brains are constantly trying to make sense of the world around us. And when we see a group of people, we're more likely to focus on the group as a whole rather than each individual. Another theory is that social comparison plays a big role in the cheerleader effect. When we see someone in a group, we're more likely to compare them to the others, which can make them seem more attractive by contrast. This could be because we're naturally competitive, and when we see someone who's part of a group, we want to know how they stack up against the others. Research has also shown that context plays a huge role in the cheerleader effect. For example, if we see someone in a group of people who are all dressed up and looking great, we're more likely to perceive them as attractive because of the context in which we're seeing them. But if we were to see them alone, without the benefit of the group, we might not find them as attractive. So what does the cheerleader effect really tell us about human relationships and social interactions? For one, it suggests that our perception of attractiveness is highly dependent on context and social cues. It also tells us that we're more likely to perceive people as attractive when they're part of a group, which can have implications for how we form relationships and interact with others. In addition, the cheerleader effect can also influence how we form first impressions and make judgments about people. If we're more likely to find people attractive when they're in a group, does that mean we're also more likely to form positive impressions of them? And what about when we see them alone? Do we suddenly find them less attractive? The cheerleader effect is a complex phenomenon that reveals a lot about human psychology and social behavior. By understanding how it works, we can gain insight into how we perceive attractiveness and how we form relationships with others. That's it for today's video on the cheerleader effect. If you have any thoughts or experiences you'd like to share, please leave them in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning more about psychological phenomena like this, be sure to check out my next video on the topic.